All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Reed Carlberg. Welcome to the SharePoint Embedded 101 webinar. I am excited to be your host today, and I'm actually here along with my partner in crime, Bill Baer. We've been talking about SharePoint Embedded now for several months together, and so my role today is going to be speaking on the presentation and walking you through the content and the slides. And Bill is going to be working on the question and answer section. So if you have a question that you want to put into chat, you should go ahead and put that in, and Bill and I will work together to make sure that those get answered. Now, today we've got a packed agenda. We're going to do a broad overview of SharePoint Embedded. We're going to talk about the why and the what behind it. We're going to do a demo for SharePoint Embedded and also SharePoint Embedded plus Copilot in action. We're going to talk more about security, compliance, and collaboration. And of course, we're going to end on getting started. Now, the reason that Bill and I wanted to do this webinar today in particular is that the SharePoint Embedded product team is just back from doing a tour in both New York City and London, talking to some of our great customers about SharePoint Embedded, what it is, how they might use it, and gathering their feedback. And so I'll be sharing some updated information with you today as we go through this. And I look forward to your questions as well. Your questions are definitely going to really help us make this the best product it can possibly be. So please feel free to jump in. Now, I want to start off with like this core truth that's out there. And if you are a software developer, a product manager, an IT leader, anybody who is in technology, you know that every app is going to be a Copilot app. Every app is going to be an AI app. Nobody out there today is thinking that they're going to do an app that doesn't have something to do with AI in the future. That's just not the way the system is working right now. The world is working right now. So as you think about this future where every app is going to embed lots of AI and Copilot capabilities in it, you know, people are wondering how it works. And I'm actually pretty excited because it turns out it's just 3 easy steps. So number one, you want to bring all of your source data into one globally compliant storage area for easy access. You want to make sure that inputs and outputs are properly secured for sensitive data via policies, ACLs, and retention labels. And of course, then you want to integrate with a common set of tools so that people can easily interact with and actually use both the inputs and the outputs of whatever your Copilot app is. Now, of course, this 1, 2, 3, I say it's 3 easy steps, but if you're on this call today, you know exactly how difficult each one of these steps is. In fact, if you are working in a modern enterprise, you know that files and documents are spread literally everywhere throughout the organization. Typically, when I talk to our enterprise customers today, they have a mix of both line of business apps that their team has built and ISV provided apps that they've purchased. And usually, if these are managing files and documents in some way, they have their own siloed store. And the challenge, of course, with that is that when you have all of these different file and document stores, you end up with a diverse set of capabilities around security, compliance, collaboration, administering them, making sure that you have audit logs, all of the stuff that we know enterprises need. And it creates a really labor-intensive, difficult to manage environment. And so we started to ask ourselves this core question, which is how might we, in the age of Copilot and in the age of AI, help our customers bring together all of this content into a unified content platform that delivers consistent security, collaboration, content management, and of course, AI capabilities. And this is where SharePoint Embedded comes in. So SharePoint Embedded is a brand new way to embed Microsoft 365 features into your app. It's API only. It's a completely headless version of SharePoint specifically designed for apps. But what's really important to remember is that it stores this content inside a dedicated partition within your M365 tenant. And by doing that, it includes all of the M365 collaboration, security, and compliance capabilities that you and your users require. Now, it has all of the integrated content management control of SharePoint. It is Microsoft 365 Copilot ready. Like I said, we're going to do a demo of that here in just a minute. And a couple of things that are really important to remember is that this is consumptive APIs that are powered by Microsoft Graph. These are outside of your existing Microsoft 365 entitlements, and there's a lot of good reasons for that, which we'll talk about in a second. And it also includes all of your M365 business continuity promises so that you can make sure your systems are as reliable as they need to be. Now, this is a generally available product. It is accessible worldwide. We actually went GA on at Build earlier this year, so back in May. And so if you're interested in reading more about this, and there's a great explainer video in here too, you can go ahead and point your phone at that QR code, and it'll come up. So this is, again, generally available, accessible worldwide, ready for use today. There's nothing special that you have to do to enable it. So let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like. And I want to really make sure that we focus on this for a second, because the important thing that you need to remember when you're using SharePoint Embedded is you're actually using the exact same secure, compliant, scalable, trusted stack that Microsoft uses to build our first-party applications. So for example, if you've used Microsoft Loop or Microsoft Designer, you've actually already used SharePoint Embedded in the background. Those are two apps out of many that are built on top of it. And when you build your custom apps on top of it, you get that exact same stack. It includes the M365 security and compliance layer, and of course, it's built on top of the Microsoft Cloud. Now, I started off by saying that SharePoint Embedded is a great way to deliver M365 features via your app. And we actually talk about these using what we call the 4 C's. And don't worry, we're going to come back to this. It's all about Copilot, compliance, collaboration, and core storage. And I've listed a lot of different features here that are included when you use SharePoint Embedded, but I'm only going to talk really about a couple of them. And if you're interested, we can, talk more about them in the discussion. But for example, if you think about collaboration, SharePoint Embedded is the easiest way to make sure that you can do Office collaboration with files and documents in an app. It includes full access to Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. You have both the web and the desktop client. And you can do full collaboration. So you have all the at mentions, you have live presence, you can do sharing to internal and external users. There's even a previewing system so that you can preview more than 300 different file types with just a click of a button, and without having to develop that preview capability on your own. Now, that's just part of it. Of course, in the compliance area, we have e-discovery, auditing. If you are an E3 or E5 licensee and you have access to things like bring your own key and DLP features, those flow through into SharePoint Embedded managed files and documents. It really is a great way to deliver all of these features as part of your app quickly and easily. And I want to point out that this is actually designed for all kinds of apps. It works for LOB apps that you might develop internally, and it also works for third-party ISV apps that you might purchase. So using SharePoint Embedded is a great way to ensure that however you get the app, it has all of the features that you need in order to be successful. So how did we do this? There's a fantastic innovation behind this that I want to make sure that you're grounded on, because it really is important. And so if you think today about what an M365 tenant looks like, it kind of looks like this. There's a boundary, and within that boundary, it's configured to behave a certain way. Across the whole thing, you have this notion of a storage platform. And already today, that storage platform has the ability to have multiple partitions. So for example, SharePoint and OneDrive have the same storage capabilities, but they behave differently and are partitioned from each other. And so they're actually separate apps. And what we're doing is we're introducing the ability for you to create and manage your own partition within that same M365 storage platform. Now, you interact with it via the Microsoft Graph APIs. And if you're used to using Microsoft Graph APIs for things like Drive and Drive item interaction, you use those same set of APIs with SharePoint Embedded. Now, the other innovation that's behind this that's really important is that we have this new notion, this brand new notion of SharePoint Embedded containers. And SharePoint Embedded containers are how we power the file and document management behind both our first-party apps and whatever app you build within SharePoint Embedded. They're lightweight, they're highly scalable. Our default limit, for example, is that you can have 100,000 of these SharePoint Embedded containers per app, per tenant. And so, the whole idea is that an app controls everything about its containers. It controls security, it controls how many they have, it controls what documents are in each, as far as the information architecture. But the idea is that these containers should map to whatever business construct you are trying to actually work with within that app. Once you're there, they are a scale, unit, and security boundary. And so if you need to create another container for some reason, you can go ahead and simply instantiate it via code. It's very fast. If you need to have a group of people that have access to one container but not another container, it's very easy to simply set that programmatically. And best of all, you can actually manage these through the standard SharePoint admin console, and there's role-based access control. We have a new role I'll talk about in just a minute. So SharePoint Embedded containers and this notion of a SharePoint Embedded partition, these are the two innovations that really make this possible for you. So I like to stop early and do a demo so you have a little bit more concrete example of what it is that we're talking about. And I'm just going to go over here to a regular browser. It'll take me just a second. There it is. Almost there. Okay. And so you can see I'm just running on localhost. So this is a standard application that is very easy to work with. And I'm going to go ahead and click on sign in. And when I sign in, it's a regular Microsoft sign in. So this Greenwood Eccentrics is just a regular production business standard account. I've actually configured this to always ask for permissions just so that you can see it. And so we have a pretty bare minimum set of permissions here. And I'm going to go ahead and click on accept. And then once I do that, you can see that this looks nothing like SharePoint Online. And it probably doesn't look like any other app you're working with. This is a fully custom application. Now, I've designed this application primarily to help developers understand the different type of API interactions that are occurring in the background. So don't get too hung up on the user experience. You can build whatever user experience works right for you. And so you can see that we have these containers. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on one of them. And now you see that I have some folders, and then I also have some different types of documents in here. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do with the document, just so you can see it in action, is I'm going to go ahead and click on Edit. And so when I click on Edit, this actually starts up the Word web client. I can also go through and actually set this up so that by default opens up the desktop client, but in this case, we're just doing the web one. And what I'll do is I'll just make some changes. Say, hello, webinar. And it automatically does everything in the background that you would expect it to do. So I'll go ahead and close out of that here as soon as I can get that to go away. There we go. And if I now preview it, right, you'll see that when I preview it, it has that change that I just made, because of course it's doing all the real-time updates in the background. So if I get out of this, there we go. And I want to actually look at versions. I can look at versions. And this one's a little bit ugly, so it's all OData code in here. But you see that I've got several different versions of this that it tracks over time. And this is just one of the features that you get automatically out of the box when you manage your files and documents with SharePoint Embedded. And so it should look very familiar if you're used to doing these type of interactions with SharePoint Online, because it is literally the exact same feature. So there's a bunch of other stuff that we can do here, but what I want to do now is I want to show you how lightweight it is to create a container. So I'm going to create a container and I'm going to say October webinar is the name and the description is just hello. There you go. And so you'll see that it actually shows a bunch of API details in here. Because again, this sample app is just designed to help you see the API in action. And you can see it actually happens very quickly. And there's a bunch of stuff in here which should look pretty familiar to you. So we have this notion of a drive ID here, which should look pretty familiar. In the background, that's what we're using, is we're using the same technology underneath the hood. So I'll go ahead and click on continue. And let's go ahead and let's see, we will go into it. And we're going to go ahead and create and edit a new blank Word document. And this one is just called webinar greetings.docx. Now, I could make this an Excel file, or I could make this a PowerPoint file. I could do any of those. And so now, since I just made a new blank one, of course, it's going to come in and say, hello, this is a blank document for a demo. All right. Thanks for coming to the webinar. There you go. And I'll go ahead and close out of that. And now, just because of the way my app works, it actually does a couple of kind of interesting things. It closes that out. But what I'll do now is I'll start to take a look at active containers. So I'm over in the SharePoint Admin Center, and this is what it looked like before I created that October webinar. So now I'm going to go ahead and refresh it, and you'll see that it has now this October webinar that was created in here. Now, I'm not really using any material storage, but it is actually part now of your regular SharePoint admin capability. And so this is one of the magic things about SharePoint Embedded, is it gives you as an app developer absolute control over your file and document storage area. And then it also integrates with key M365 capabilities like compliance, collaboration, and of course, all the core storage and business reliability features. And now what I want to do is I want to take a second and just show you what the Copilot system looks like in the background, because there's multiple ways that you can use Copilot. And so you can use, of course, the standard Microsoft 365 Copilot if you have it configured. I'll talk more about that configuration in just a minute after I get done with the demo. But you can also go in and you can create a custom Copilot. We are doing a private preview on this right now. And so I'm just going to click on containers, and you can see it's actually using the same set of containers I was looking at before. And I'm going to go over here to London. So I said that we just went to New York and London. And of course, it was fun to create some sample data, which was relevant for those two audiences. And some of that is some fun resumes. So I'm going to say, hey, do we have any resumes on file? And we'll click on send. And it'll take just a second, but it's going to go through and it's going to find some of the resumes that we have on file. And of course, if you start to look at these references down here, you'll see that these references are in fact some of the files and documents which are in this container. So this is again in private preview. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, you should send us an email just to the email address we have all over the place, SharePointEmbedded@Microsoft.com. But you get the idea how it works. Now, there are other things in here too. So we could talk about London economic history. Because I had it create a whole bunch of documents for me, which was super fun. We'll see what it comes up with. Oh yeah, here we go. These are all ones that are in there. And now if we do go and take a look at these, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull this one up. You'll see that it does give us that same capability, but of course now we're in PowerPoint as compared to Word. Okay, so it's a quick demo. We've gone through, we've created a container, we've uploaded documents, we've edited documents, we've used Copilot. You've seen the actual administration of this in action. So let's go back and now start talking about some of the capabilities of SharePoint Embedded in general. While I'm doing this, Bill, do you have any questions on the chat that we should be talking through?
We don't have anything immediate, so I'll just keep an eye and we'll monitor from here.
All right, sounds good. Let's see. I don't know if we're going to have the bottom footer here. Looks like we might for a while. Enjoy. So before we get too much further, I want to just let you know that we actually have a wide variety of tools that are built and developed to actually help people get started with SharePoint Embedded. So if you're somebody who likes to use VS Code, we have a great SharePoint Embedded VS Code plugin. It's a super easy way to get started. It walks you through creating a proof of concept app, and it configures everything you need behind the scenes. And so this is a great way for you to get started with SharePoint Embedded if you are interested in kicking the tires a little bit as a developer. Now, what you need to know is that apps have dedicated storage. This is one of the core value propositions of SharePoint Embedded. So although they are inside that M365 storage layer, if you have an app that is using SharePoint Embedded, nobody else can get to those SharePoint Embedded containers except for the app, right? The app controls all interaction. Now, the exception to that, of course, is compliance, which I'll show you that in just a second. But so app 1, that's going to have its own stack of containers. App 2 is going to have its own stack. App 3, it can have its own stack. Now, there are different ways that you can configure that depending upon what your business requirements are, but the default is that only an app has access to its containers. Now, I've said before that this is something which is usable by both line of business apps as well as third-party developed ISV apps. And when you're in the ISV world, what happens is an ISV actually defines how it's going to manage files and documents, and then it takes that definition. It's something that we have called a container type definition, and it actually deploys that to all the customers who are buying its app. And so then, a typical deployment looks like this, where you have one tenant, which is defining things, and then you have a number of tenants, which are consuming things. It's a very straightforward way of working. Now, one of the key advantages of SharePoint Embedded over SharePoint Online is the allocation of API resource units. So if you've been developing in the SharePoint Online world for a while, you probably are pretty familiar with these. And in the SharePoint Online world, your amount of API usage capability is all tied to how many users you have licensed. And so, for example, if you have 1,000 users that are licensed, you can make 1,200 resource unit calls per minute. Now, the resource unit calls, there's different levels of resource unit consumption, which I'm not going to get into today. But the important part to note is that SharePoint Embedded, because it is not part of your M365 entitlements, it's not based on users. And so your per app, per tenant resources usage per minute is actually at 12,000. Now, note that that's twice as high as the highest level on SharePoint Online. And also note that that can be increased on request. So 12,000 is where we are starting with that. And so far, we haven't had anybody ask us to go higher than that. But it is twice, literally, the highest resource unit limit usage over on SharePoint Online. So SharePoint Embedded gives you a definite advantage that way. Now, I did show you the Microsoft 365 experience integration partially. I showed you how to create a Word document, how to edit and preview a Word document, how to do the same with a PowerPoint. But it's important to note that you actually have lots more M365 integration. So for example, you can configure your app so that M365 users can use the standard M365 search and find documents in your app. Now, that's a great way to do discovery, but we also know that not everyone wants that. Sometimes people want to make sure that only their app can discover whatever documents they're using. And so this is actually an example of one of the many configurable options when you use SharePoint Embedded. So you, as an app developer, have the choice to say, should these files and documents be discoverable in M365 or should they not be discoverable? You get your choice. Also, you can see in the middle of this save dialog over here that there is some branding, this little diamond that we have on the left-hand side. So you get to actually surface your app branding in Office as part of this. Now, there's a bunch more capabilities in there, such as most recently used, the ways that you might do various sharing operations. All of that stuff is included as part of your use of SharePoint Embedded. Also, if you are a company who has invested in Microsoft Purview and you have capabilities like e-discovery, global audit, DLP, a bunch of others that are out there, those are actually supported within SharePoint Embedded as well. So this is a great way to think about getting more value out of your E3 and E5 licenses if you're working with an ISV. That ISV can use SharePoint Embedded, and now they can take advantage of all of these capabilities as well as part of their app. Now, this one does require you to have those E3 or E5 licenses in order to use it. So I showed you a little bit about Copilot, but there's a lot more. One of the things that you need to know around how Copilot works is it requires something which is called the semantic index. I'm going to imagine that a lot of people on the call have heard of semantic indices, but the short definition of that is it helps make connections between whatever a user might be querying for and whatever content is actually in the document. And so when a document is saved to SharePoint Embedded, it actually gets both into a lexical index, which is a standard M365 search, and into a semantic index, which is what we use for Copilot capabilities. So all of that and the vector embeddings and everything else that you've been hearing about that's required for actual AI apps to work, all of that is in there. Plus, it includes the full security descriptors that you need to do accurate security trimming. And most importantly, the data never leaves the tenant boundary. Now, I showed you a demo of this. This is another example of that exact same Copilot widget in action. You can see it over here on the right-hand side where they have an HR virtual assistant. So this is what we're doing as part of our SharePoint Embedded Copilot private preview. So if you are interested in being able to have this kind of custom experience within your app, you should reach out to us and we'll be happy to talk with you about what parts of it seem appropriate for your app and if there's anything which doesn't seem like it's a fit. Now, probably the biggest question that I get as I've been talking about SharePoint Embedded around the world is, when should you use which document management approach? Because Microsoft offers a number of them. Now, there's no way that I can tell you for every app exactly what you should do. But just like everything in software and everything in technology, there are trade-offs. And so if we start at the left and we look at Azure Blob Store, what it brings is it brings rock solid object storage in the cloud. It is a great way to store documents. However, it's also outside of the M365 security and compliance boundary. So then you go to SharePoint Online, and SharePoint Online is inside the M365 security and compliance boundary. It has a standard user experience as part of that. The security is integrated with, the security is integrated with everything else that you have as part of your SharePoint Online system. And the collaboration that's part of that is designed for licensed users. Where SharePoint Embedded really makes a difference is that because it's a partition, it also has partition security. It has very declarative, deterministic security where if you haven't added somebody specifically to a container, they are not going to be able to see that file and document. You get to build your own custom user experience. You are not relying on the SharePoint Online user experience. And these containers are very lightweight. You saw how quick it was to go ahead and create a brand new one. Now, we also talked about this dedicated resource allocation. right? Where you get that 12,000 resource units per tenant per app per minute. That's amazing. That is a huge boon for many people who have intense apps that are working in relatively tight boundaries of SharePoint Online. It is also inside your M365 security and compliance boundary. And very importantly, is that collaboration works for both licensed users in your tenant and external users. And then, as we said before, this is separately metered. So if you're looking at the ability to track expenses for a particular app or track expenses related to maybe a particular ISV who needs to use some of these internal resources, or you want to do chargebacks to a department, SharePoint Embedded is your easy way to do that. So there's lots of different ways that you can think about which to use a particular document management approach. And so this is how you can think about these three here today. Now, I want to make sure everyone walks away from this webinar knowing what I call the 4 C's. SharePoint Embedded delivers compliance, collaboration, Copilot, and core storage, all for apps, all within your M365 tenant, so that you can focus on your unique business value rather than trying to build out a whole file and document management roadmap. So when in doubt, remember the 4 C's. Those are the big reasons why you should be thinking about SharePoint Embedded. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about some fine detail that people bring up. So number one, part of my introduction, I talked about some M365 applications that also use SharePoint Embedded. If it's an M365 application using SharePoint Embedded, that's actually using part of your M365 storage quota. Your custom applications are not part of the M365 entitlement. They're consumption-based, it's pay-as-you-go, metered resources, and there's a whole Azure subscription that goes on in the background. Now, critically, you should know that it is also eligible for Mac. So if you are a company that has Mac or your customers have Mac, this is something which is very useful, is that SharePoint Embedded goes ahead and decrements those. Now, permission model. There's a lot around the permission model to kind of think about. Number one is that when a customer or an admin is using either a line of business or an ISV app, you have to grant OAuth permissions to that app. And we actually have a new permission scope as part of this in Graph, which is called file storage container.selected. And the idea is that when you give that minimum permission to a particular app, they have a very narrow scope where that app can only work with that particular collection of file storage container. So you remember earlier when I was saying that app 1 can only access app 1 containers, app 2 can only access app 2 containers? This is how we do it. Now, when you're working at the API level, you have the ability to do both app only and app plus user delegated permissions. Some of the calls, you absolutely have to have a user as part of it. So for example, if you're going to be doing collaboration, you have to have a user as part of it. But on the app only front, you can use app only to actually go ahead and instantiate a new container, for example. Now, there's a bunch more capabilities around permissions. The important thing to note is that we've designed this in such a way that it works with the complexity of Microsoft's permission requirements. And that means it's probably going to work for the apps that you're developing as well. So if you'd like to talk more about that, you should definitely reach out to us. So there are some interesting things about the permission model with containers. And this has to do with who has access to the containers. So you can see at the top, we have this notion of reader, writer, manager, and owner permission roles. And so these are groups where you can actually add me as a writer, you can add Bill as a manager, you can add yourself as an owner, and we all have access to the content, but we have different levels of access. So as a reader, for example, I can't modify or delete content. Once you get content in there, you can also add permissions at both the document level, the file level, or at a folder level. And so, for example, you might not have myself, Reed, as a reader, writer, manager, or owner, but you could add me on a particular document within the container, and I would still have the ability to do that. Now, on the sharing side, tenants have broad-based sharing capabilities, and they can turn on or turn off external sharing. At the app level, you can also turn on external sharing if you need to, or turn off external sharing. And so the idea is that you, as the admin, are in control. So you can allow sharing outside of your app, restrict it to your app. You can have all sorts of granular capabilities there. Now, there are a bunch of admin tools, and this is actually a build here, which I always forget this is a build, so I'm sorry about that. But we can use PowerShell to do admin. We can use the SharePoint Admin Center, Microsoft Purview, Microsoft Graph. We have all kinds of capabilities about how you might work to administer anything that's built on top of SharePoint Embedded. And it's actually designed very specifically to work within the type of tools that you already work with today. Now, there is a new role that is pretty important for you to know about. And so just like we have the ability for an app to only access a particular set of containers, we've introduced a new role called the SharePoint Embedded Administrator. And this is where somebody can access, a human can administer just a certain collection of SharePoint embedded containers. And so we've done that for both the apps that are doing it and for humans. Now, I said before that this is high scale. It's all backed by consumptive billing. We have a number of different options for you depending upon whether you're building a line of business app or an ISV app. The thing to take away from this is that it actually is within the Azure portal. And so if you're used to using Azure for different types of billing management, you're going to have a high level of comfort with what we've done for SharePoint Embedded. On the ISV front, you actually have the option for how you want the customer to pay for this. So, for example, this is something where you could just consume all of the costs and then either absorb those or rebill those, whatever your choice is. Or you could do something called direct-to-customer billing, where your app relies on the customer paying Microsoft directly for their SharePoint embedded usage. Either one of those is totally fine. Now, we have three types of meters. We have storage per gigabyte, we have API transactions, and we have egress. And I think, you know what, I forgot to put the pricing in here, but the pricing on this is pretty straightforward, and this is public. So the storage per gigabyte is 20 cents per gigabyte per month. We actually calculate that per day. So you're going to see the price quoted as, I think it's 0.00667 per day. But it's works out to 20 cents per gigabyte per month. And then API transaction is a penny for 500. And so you'll see that quoted out there as well. And then egress is when you move data outside of the system. And so on the egress side, that is when maybe you're saving a document to local or you're moving it to another server. That is actually 5 cents per gigabyte. Okay, we're winding up in the last couple of things. And a couple of things that I want to make sure that you think about. Number one, if you are working with developers or you're working with an ISV, you should tell them about SharePoint Embedded. And the reason is that you get the same trusted storage that you're used to with SharePoint Online. You get all of the M365 compliance capabilities. You have the collaboration capabilities. You have the Copilot capabilities, right? You have all those core business continuity promises. But you get your dedicated resource limits that are separate from your M365 entitlements. You have your isolated permission stack so that it's very deterministic who can get access to which container. You have your isolated administration capability. And of course, it's all working with the familiar Graph API. Okay, now we do get some questions. And Bill, I don't know if you want to come off if you have any questions, but I thought I would go ahead and prime the pump with some of these because this is a core set that people often ask as we go through this. So jump in if you like. But the first question that people get to is when should they use SharePoint Online? and when should they use SharePoint Embedded. And so SharePoint Online is great when you need the SharePoint UX, and the M365 resource limits that they have are plenty for you. SPE is great when you want your own user experience, you want the partition security, you want a dedicated resource stack for high use applications, and you want collaboration with unlicensed guest users. We often get asked if we support Power Platform and Dynamics integration, and you can definitely do both via the existing APIs. We're actually currently working on a Power Platform adapter, so stay tuned for more information on that. And we'd love to learn more about how you're using Dynamics because we're still investigating that one. But you can absolutely build integration today. A lot of people ask us if the SharePoint Embedded has the same malware and antivirus scanning as SharePoint, and it does. People are often curious if you can add guest users to a SharePoint Embedded container, and you certainly can. You can add both B2B and B2C. B2C requires a little bit more work. And then we often get questions around recycle bin, whether or not a container has the same type of first stage and second stage recycle bin and that same 93-day rule. And in this case, because there's no user experience, it's just the first stage. You just have the one recycle bin. Okay, and I'm going to leave this up. Bill, do you have any other questions, or have you been able to answer them in the chat over there?
Yeah, I've got a few answered, but let's just go ahead and throw two out there while people digest this particular screen. With custom copilots with SharePoint Embedded, a question is whether or not you have to adhere to Copilot's native UX, or if that's up to the developer to customize on their own. And then secondarily, do we support things like Microsoft 365 backup?
Okay, these are great questions. So I'm going to start with Copilot. So today, our private preview is that existing user experience. And so what we've done is we've made that so that you could bring that into your app. Now, there's a lot of work that's happening to expand our custom Copilot capabilities. So I would say stay tuned for more on that. But as part of our SharePoint Embedded private preview today, you do get to use that same control. It's important to note that that control is actually highly customizable. I really didn't customize that control at all. I kind of just took it out of the box, but you can change the colors, the fonts, all the sizing, all of that sort of good stuff to be something which is a better fit for your app. Bill, I know you're doing a lot of stuff on Copilot. Anything you want to add there?
No, I think that was one of the questions. A follow-on question to that is, recently we announced innovation around agents in SharePoint and OneDrive.
Yep.
And particularly the SharePoint agent, is that available in a SharePoint Embedded app?
So I actually don't know the answer to that question. This is a fast-moving area, and I got to say, I don't think I'm quite up to date. Do you know the answer, Bill?
I don't offhand. It's something that I'd have to look at. My instinct tells me no, just given the freshness of innovation on that side. So it's something I can follow up with and get back to the chat to answer.
Okay. One thing I will say is that you should stay tuned to this space. I started off with this notion that every app is a Copilot app. Every app is an AI app. Nobody today is building apps that, will not have those super intelligent capabilities as part of it. And what I'm seeing inside Microsoft and with SharePoint Embedded is that this is a very fast moving space. So let's keep talking, and we're going to do another one of these events in about a month. And so tune in for that one, and we can probably give you an update. Now, Bill, you also asked about backup capability. We have some great capabilities like M365 Backup and M365 Archive. Today, those do not yet work with SharePoint Embedded containers, but we're actually all part of the same team, and we talk about this constantly. And so I think the first thing that's going to be available is M365 Archive for SharePoint Embedded. I don't have a timeline for you. But then on the backup side, we're also talking about that. And so I think that is going to be in the not too distant future as well. So please stay tuned. Bill, any other questions?
Those were the two most pressing and I think most interesting so far.
Great. I want to call out some ways that you can get started, right? So if you're on the call today and you're thinking, hey, this looks great, but what do I do? We have a variety of ways for you to engage. So number one is self-service. If you go to this start-SPE, there is all the documentation there that walks you through how to get up and running with SharePoint Embedded. And this is great if you are somebody who is a developer and you like, being able to read and implement and test. It also has all the information around M365 integration and customability there. And so if you're an admin or a product owner or an architect, it's a great resource. We have just launched a customer connection program. Now, this is a structured 6-week program that we're just finishing up our first cohort, actually, and we're getting great reviews on it. And the whole idea is that it covers a new topic once a week and then gives you some background, some capability, and then gives you some assignment to do. And so I think the commitment on this is, a couple of hours a week sort of thing. And so if you're interested, you should go to this aka.ms/SPE/CCP sign up. The next cohort starts October 30th. It's free, it's easy. The person who leads it is Tutu Abimbala, and she brings in people from different parts of the company to help talk about their specialist areas. It really is a great program. So if you're interested in that, you should jump in. And then we also have an early access program that is really designed to be deep engagement with some of our largest customers. And so if you think this might be you, you should contact your Microsoft account team and they can reach out to us and we'll talk more about it. This tends to be a very productive way to pursue complicated apps. So if that meets you, like if you're part of that, you should reach out. Now, we also have a gallery of sample apps that are out there. This is part of it, just this SPE-samples. It's a great selection of code. There's a variety of things, including a brand new Power Platform app that Steve Pucelik on the team put together. And so if you think that's something that you might be interested in, you should go take a look at it. And I think that is it. So I'm going to just give you one last call to action here, which is if you are interested in talking more about your particular use case, you can feel free to do it on your own. You can also feel free to engage us. Just email the team at sharepointembedded@microsoft.com, and we will work with you to help you understand where SharePoint Embedded fits and anything that might not fit. So that is it for this webinar, I think. Unless, Bill, you have anything final?
No, that was it.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for dialing in today. I look forward to going back and reading some of the comments myself and look forward to hearing from you as well. Have a great day.